This will refine your soul. Homeschooling is probably the most difficult thing that you will do as a parent. And you will have many days of realizing, wow, there's a lot of sin in my own life, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. I can yell, you think you're a certain type of person, but unless you go through the crucible of homeschooling, you're really not going to have this opportunity for sanctification that I believe God has in mind for us.
Strangers and even our own families, just to the ends of the earth, every soul that is on this planet, I pray that we would just latch on to the morning for them and their salvation. And in your son's name I pray, amen.
Amen. All right, well, it's good to be with all of you. I'm going to actually share my screen here. I'm going to be talking about homeschooling today. And we've talked about how in these sessions, how we want there to be basically teachings that are useful across the whole city, that are very fundamental to who we are as a church body and what we're trying to achieve here. And so I'm going to be talking about homeschooling. I had shared this, that I was going to do this with the fellow leadership team maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. So I'm not springing a surprise, hopefully, on anyone. The agenda for the night is as follows. I want to try to make a case why homeschooling is the ideal. I also want to acknowledge that there are different circumstances in countries where it's not possible. So for example, in Germany, it's illegal to homeschool. There are single parent homes where it's not possible. There are different situations with illness where it's not possible. I recognize that it's not an absolute, and that I'm not trying to say that it's sin to do anything but homeschooling. However, this word that I've chosen here is what I'm trying to contend for, that it is the biblical ideal that we should be striving for. I'm going to be addressing some common fears about homeschooling. I'm going to offer some ideas on how to do it with excellence. All right, so I'm going to open up here with an analogy. So here's the analogy. Let's say you're a married couple, and I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the man here, and your wife says, it's been a while since we went on a date. I would love to go on a date together. And you think about it for a while, and you say, you know what, honey? I know someone who really knows how to date well. There's a professional dater that I'm going to hire, and he's going to take you out. He's much better than I am. He's got better ideas. He's more trained in it. He can plan the whole thing better. So I want you to go out on a date with him. And the good news is we don't even have to worry about babysitting, because I can stay home with the children. Now, in that analogy here, we would all say, bad idea, right? Doesn't work. Why is that a bad idea? Why is that a pretty terrible situation? Because a date, even if the husband is not a good dater, even if he's not particularly skilled at planning there, it's supposed to be between husband and wife. And even if the husband is this poor dater, I think any wife would say, I would still rather be with my husband on this occasion rather than a professional. And I hope you can tell where I'm going with this analogy. I believe it's actually somewhat like that with the issue of schooling. Now, there are people who will say, and we're going to talk about this, well, I need a professional who knows trigonometry and this and this and this. And I'm going to make the case here that in the end, it's the relationship that is the most important, and that the God-given natural structure that we are supposed to abide with is this notion of the parents instructing the children. And so I will be the first to say, even if the academic quality is not as good as, say, it is in a public school, which I don't think needs to be the case at all. In fact, I think it should be much better. I still think that the natural structure is that parents should be schooling. Just to give a little bit of background here so that you know where I'm coming from, I went to public school from age 5 all the way till I graduated from high school. So I'm speaking as the product of a public school system, but we have been homeschooling our children. I have 8 children. My oldest is 13, and then on down to newborn. We've been homeschooling all of them since we started our journey in this whole process, and you're going to hear some of the reasons why. So the goal of parenting is to cultivate as deep a relationship as possible for the purpose of discipleship. And relationship cannot be delegated. You know, there's a few things in life that I've often thought, man, it would be so great if I could delegate this. Exercise. Wouldn't it be so great if you could just have somebody else exercise for you? Doesn't work. No matter how much you want to cultivate a relationship with someone, you can't delegate that away. And the primary goal that we ought to be striving for as parents with our children is to have this very, very deep relationship with our children. And to lose the bulk of their waking hours is a real impediment to having that relationship. I remember when I was in school, you know, you come home after school, my parents worked, and so I'd see them at 4, 5, 6 o'clock, and how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. You know, the basic insight that they had into who I was, my struggles, a lot of the things that we were going through was very minimal because I had gone down the route of public school. So I want to say here that relationship is what we're striving for, and anything that's going to be a block on that relationship, you want to try to eliminate so that you can truly be with your children, know their children, be known by them for this greater purpose of discipleship. Okay, I'm going to give both advantages and disadvantages of homeschooling, but I'm going to start with advantages here. The advantages are many. So I just said a much deeper relationship. There's no substitute for being able to spend a lot of time with your children and to see how they actually do with how do they handle the subject, how's their attention span, how do they interact with others, how well can they sit still, how do they handle adversity, how do you know these things without just that time and that depth of being able to engage with them. So a deeper relationship. Your values can be much more readily shared. I'm going to talk about that later. And then retaining your children's hearts. You know, one of the most common phenomenon that most of us who have gone, especially to public school, would attest to is that you turn 12, 13, 14, something like that, and suddenly your parents aren't cool anymore. And you start to crave the approval of your peers and others more so than your parents. And I remember going through that myself. It's very sad, it's very unfortunate, but it's just how it goes when you spend that much time with so many people that are your peers and you're in this alternative value structure that's apart from your parents. This is one of the main reasons why we decided to homeschool. I mentioned this before, but much greater visibility into your child's strengths and weaknesses. One of the things that I think happens so often is a parent will see a weakness in a child and they'll think like, how can I deal with this? And they send them off to a public school or private school. But does that really fix the weakness? Does that really address it? Or is it just throwing the rug over the weakness and hoping that somebody else fixes it somehow? In order to really solve any issue, you have to be able to see the issue. And one of the great both advantages as well as frustrations of homeschool is you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of your children's hearts. Avoiding bullying and negative peer pressure. Much greater flexibility for travel and other activities. We travel a fair bit. I wouldn't say a lot, but a fair bit. And I'm very thankful that we can just pack up and go, and we can do our schooling in Uganda, we can do it in California, we can do it in Tennessee, we can do it anywhere we want, and our children know how to roll with that. And for them, learning is really more of a lifestyle than it is associated with a particular building. This will refine your soul. Homeschooling is probably the most difficult thing that you will do as a parent. And you will have many days of realizing, wow, there's a lot of sin in my own life, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. I can yell, you think you're a certain type of person, but unless you go through the crucible of homeschooling, you're really not going to have this opportunity for sanctification that I believe God has in mind for us. And again, it's very easy to just say, like, there's problems, I'm going to send them off to school so that I don't have to face those, but you're going to miss a God-given opportunity to find and refine the junk in your own heart that God wants to clean away. You get to relearn subjects that you didn't get the first time around. I remember a few years ago, one of my boys came up to me and said, "Dad, tell me some facts about Cortez." I thought to myself, Cortez, I know he was in Mexico maybe 100, 200 years ago, and that's about it. And I had to hit the books and relearn who these people were. For a lot of people, they get to brush up on subjects that they didn't understand, or maybe they didn't even enjoy the first time around. And there is an opportunity for a vastly stronger education. I'm not going to spend as much time on this as I would like in the interest of time, but I will say that I have had the opportunity of interacting with very, very strong people from some of the best universities in the world. And it's been very interesting for me to see how enriched the upper echelons are among those who are homeschooled. And I could speak for a while on this maybe if we have time, I can get into this a little bit later. Continuity of curriculum, when you are in public school or private school, well, one teacher, you get Mrs. Jones, who's going to use this math book, and then Mr. Smith, the next year, he chooses a different math program, and then the next one, another one, and you've got all these different jumps and holes that happens. And I have taught especially sciences at the college and graduate school level over the years, and it's amazing how many holes people have. A lot of it is due to this sort of jumping around that occurs. I want to tell a story here. I was chatting with a friend of mine who's an old work colleague that I worked very closely with for about 8 years, and he was telling me about, he's not a Christian, but he was telling me about his wife, who she has a hobby of skating, ice skating, a very serious ice skater, and they happen to have a daughter who's a very good figure skater. And the daughter recently went off to college, and my friend's wife decided that she was going to really throw herself into a local club in Boston that is very committed to promoting top quality figure skating. And so she was part of some committee that raised tens of millions of dollars, huge amount of money, for apparently one of the most professional and best rinks in all of New England. And in fact, it might even be the best. It's in Norwood. It was just opened very recently here, and here's a just depiction of it. And he was telling me about this project and how they raised all the money and how they built all these different ice rinks. And then he threw in this little comment, and he said, and we even built an education center here. I think it's room 22. I'm not sure, but I think it's room 22. And he said, we built an education center because we're trying to promote Olympic quality athletes here. And he said, basically all the Olympic athletes have to homeschool. And he meant that in a casual way and went on. And I thought about it, and I thought, isn't that interesting that if you want to be an Olympic caliber athlete, you've got to be so dedicated to your particular sport, in this case, ice skating, that your homeschooling has to be mobile, and your homeschooling has to be shaped around your primary pursuit, which is this athletic endeavor. And so I thought about that, and I said, you know what? Maybe it's the case that for us who are homeschoolers, that our primary endeavor is making Olympic athletes for Jesus, and that we are so committed to that goal that we're going to do whatever it takes to shape our schedules, to shape our children's schedules around this primary goal of making these amazing athletes. And it was right around that time that I came across this quote from John Chrysostom, one of the people that I admire. So he says this on raising children: like the creators of statues, give all of your leisure time to fashioning these statues. Make them athletes for Christ. So it was a really neat convergence that happened between this conversation where he made this incidental comment and then my encountering the quote right around that same time from Chrysostom. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is what we should be doing. Our enterprise here as parents is to be giving our very, very, very best to be fashioning these statues, these future athletes for Christ. And yeah, maybe for those who want to put Jesus in a different role, they don't necessarily need to have this. But for us who are very committed to this, we need the flexibility and the ability to design everything around this primary pursuit. All right. In addition, I do think that there's elements of homeschooling as protest. I don't want to overplay this, but nor do I want to underplay it either. There's a lot of us, like myself, who came out of public schools or more traditional schools and just see a lot of brokenness and a lot of problems with the typical model here. When I think of all of the anti-God indoctrination, all the heartaches, the sexual immorality, the addictions, the body image issues, the pornography, the ungodly music, the peer pressure, the violence, you get exposed to all of this and more in public schools. I went to public schools mostly in the 1980s, and it's gotten a lot worse. This was obviously when I was in school, it was long before the internet and phones, mobile phones. I know it's gotten a lot worse since then. And I think about how many children have had their hearts slowly but surely taken away from the things of God as a result of the system. And it makes me very sad. And I don't want to be patronizing or encouraging that system. In addition, here's a completely secular author here, Seth Godin, who says, large-scale education was not developed to motivate kids or create scholars. It was invented to churn out adults who worked well within the system. So if you know anything about the history of at least modern Western schooling, it began mostly in the 1800s, along the time of industrialization. Before that, it was primarily home-based education. And the system was geared at producing people who would work well in factories, who would work well in various systems that are all about production and economics. And this is something that I think that all of us who are trying to produce followers of Jesus here ought to just keep in mind that this is the origins of a system here. It was not formed with the intent of producing disciples. In addition, Jesus says this here in Matthew 18, verse 6. He says, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. And I trust that we all take this verse literally and seriously and don't want to be in the category of causing one of these little ones, and the context here is children, to sin. One of the most satisfying, and I might even say at the stage that I'm at right now with having on the younger side, but like I said, 13 on down, children who are being homeschooled, is their innocence. I compare them to where I was when I was at their stage, and they are vastly better in terms of holiness and just this sweet childlike innocence that hasn't yet been contaminated by the things of this world. And I remember so well when I was young, still in elementary school, at 8 years old, through the public school system, was exposed to pornography. 8 years old. Lots of drugs, lots of bad things in the locker room. All those were exposed to. I never consumed those drugs, but I was exposed to them in my education system. And I wish I had never seen any of those things. And I will say that they caused a real lasting damage. I can still remember those images. I can still hear the songs, the ungodly songs. When I walk into the grocery store, as soon as I hear even a line of it, I want to sing the rest of it because I was exposed to these things there. My mind was filled for many years with lots of ungodly things. And I hope that none of us want to be in the category of causing this. And we as parents are going to be the ones who answer to God one day for the exposures that our children had. And the reality is, and I think most of us who've gone to typical schools will know, your parents just don't know. They don't know. You're off on your own. They don't know who you're talking to. They don't know what's going on behind the building. They have no idea. And often children don't share those things. There's shame associated there, or they just know they're in the wrong. We have to take this very seriously. This alone is worth the cost of homeschooling. If there were no other benefit than just honoring this teaching alone and not putting our children in front of such damaging temptation, it is alone worth it. And like I said, that's setting aside the academics and everything else in favor of just the price of the value, I should say, of what we gain with holiness and a life that is sanctified unto God. There's an analogy which I like to give here, which comes from the realm of a virus, which is a member of the herpes virus family. So herpes virus is a family of viruses that once you get infected with them, they stay with you for life. So like the cold sore is a very common form of herpes virus, HSV1, and you get this viral infection and it lives inside of you and it waits until you are weak or tired or sick, and then it will come out again and you'll get these cold sores. Another very famous member of the family of herpes virus is chickenpox. And so I had the regular chickenpox when I was young, long before they had vaccines for it. And so because of that, because I had regular chickenpox, I now have living in my spinal cord chickenpox vaccine. It's dormant, of course, but if you are sick or immunocompromised, extremely tired, if you get injured in some way, this can come out decades later, and often it comes out in older people in a very painful way, where you get typically this like one-sided band of very painful blisters, so painful you can hardly even wear clothes over those blisters. And I think this is a great analogy for sin. You know, Jesus used disease as an analogy for sin, right? He likened sin to leprosy, for example. And in a lot of ways, what sin is like is a virus. It goes into you, and those images, those lyrics, those words, they're inside of you, and you can't shake it. Can you be forgiven for them? Of course, but they're still there, and you carry those for a lifetime. And when there is a moment of weakness, when you are tired, when you're frustrated, when you are not having a good day, when you're angry, when you're just not in the right place, those images come out. Those they come back again, and they can dog you, just like the recurrence of chickenpox can. It's called shingles, by the way, when it comes back, just like when you have shingles again. And it's very painful. It's very sad. And I'm thankful to be producing children who don't have viruses infecting their mind, their spiritual minds. And as I said, I unfortunately did, and it caused tremendous damage, and I believe many, many years of loss that impaired me, unfortunately. Now, there are disadvantages. It's certainly not all a bed of roses, by no means. And for a lot of people, they think the time is a deterrent. And for a lot of people, they just say, my career is what I want to choose. And because my career is more important to me than these advantages, I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to send my child off to some kind of school there. I hope and I trust that most of you listening on the call here, that's not your heart here, that you would be willing to sacrifice of yourself for the sake of your children. I will also say there are many, many difficult days where you will feel like giving up. There are countless days where you just feel like, what am I doing? I can't believe this. This was so hard. Why did this child do this? Why is it going so badly? Can I do this? Am I qualified? A long list of fears you can rattle off. And it's hard, it's taxing, and you will be tested in very profound ways. And fear is, frankly, another major reason. Fear of, is my child going to get a good enough education? Am I going to mess him up? I'm going to give a special word here to the moms. This is a quote from a woman named Jamie Erickson, who says it better than I could, so I'm going to read to you from her. She says, most mothers, myself included, live in a committed, lifelong relationship with self-doubt. Fear, anxiety, and tension seem always to be the byproducts of our love and investment. We hear the gentle whispers of worry and wonder if we can raise our children right, raise them well, raise them at all. For the homeschool mother, that self-doubt is magnified by the full weight of her child's education. She feels the burden of proof that her children will learn all that they need to know and be as good, if not better, than those being taught by the other guys. And if they don't, well, the blame must surely fall to her. When you decided to homeschool, you opted to swim upstream, joining a group of people who have decided to go in a different educational direction from the rest of the world. And different is always a little bit scary, especially as it relates to your kids. It would be so much easier if homeschooling came with a just add water and stir tag, but it doesn't. It comes with a lot of questions. It comes with a lot of unknowns. Consequently, it often comes with a lot of fears. I love the way she put that. And I feel like we need to tackle that head on. And I only have a short period of time here to speak with you here, but I believe that the fear, uncertainty, and doubt are one of the biggest deterrents that people have when they have just question marks in terms of moving forward in this direction. Now, a family-based education, another term for homeschool, is always assumed or taught in the Bible. So this is a verse in Proverbs chapter 1. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. It's all throughout the Bible, this undercurrent that the parents are teaching the children. I'm not even going to read this passage. It's so well known. I actually talked about this in a previous meeting that's online already. Deuteronomy 6, that famous passage that speaks about how we're supposed to be instructing our children all day long, right? From when we rise to when we go to sleep, we're supposed to be teaching them about the scriptures from morning until evening. And this is paradigmatic in the Bible, and hardly even noticed by most of us, because we're not even thinking to read the Bible in this perspective. And then I often call this the iron law of discipleship. It's from Luke 6:40. This is Jesus who says, everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. And so this is kind of the principle in play here, where we as parents are trying to make our children into believers, into those who are disciples. And because we know our own character, we ought to be saying, imitate me as I imitate Christ, to use the words of Paul. The notion of putting our children at the feet of people that we barely even know, or maybe don't know at all, is just frankly going against the iron law of discipleship. You're hoping that people, somehow your child won't pick up different aspects of the belief and practices of the people that they're learning from. In addition, schooling by the world was rejected. There's a fascinating couple of stories in the Apocrypha that specifically address this. This is in 2 Maccabees, so chapter 4, where there's a character there whose name is Jason, who establishes a gymnasium. So the gymnasium is the Greek school. So with perverse delight, Jason, established a Greek school or gymnasium at the very foot of the citadel, where he induced the noblest young man to wear the Greek hat. The craze for Hellenism and the adoption of foreign customs reached such a pitch through the outrageous wickedness of Jason, the renegade and would-be high priest, that the priest no longer cared about the service of the altar. Disdaining the temple and neglecting the sacrifices, they hastened. Someone could go on mute there, that'd be great. I'm hearing somebody on their computer. Disdaining the temple and neglecting the sacrifices, they hastened at the signal for the games to take part in the unlawful exercises at the arena. What their ancestors had regarded as honors, they despised. What the Greeks esteemed as glory, they prized highly. For this reason, they found themselves in serious trouble. The very people whose manner of life they emulated and whom they desired to imitate in everything became their enemies and oppressors. So you can see here how the author of Maccabees says that this introduction of the Greek school just ruined the people there, and their whole value system flipped and became topsy-turvy. And the very people that they should have been suspicious of became the ones that they admired, and then paradoxically became the ones that then oppressed them. So this is the history of the Jewish people with schooling from the outside. Again, they adopted the home-based model. And I want to give a little bit of more encouragement here. You are capable of far more than you think. Far more than you think. We've been reading, we've been doing manuscript Bible studies here on Oakland Street through the book of Exodus. And so often I've been struck by this pattern where the Israelites and Moses, they feel like they're done. They feel like they're end of the rope. And, why me? I can't do this. I'm done. Israelites complaining to Moses, why have you made us a stench before Pharaoh? He's going to kill us. Moses saying, I'm done. God, this happens multiple times. And of course, we reading the book know the end of the story, and we're, gripping our chairs saying, hang on, everyone. You can do this. God is with you. He's going to give you the grace. You might seem like you're not able to do it, but you can do it. We of course can flip forward and see what happens there and the deliverance that happens. I think this is a great lesson for us who, when we come to the end of our ropes, we need to remember that God can give a grace that is supernatural and amazing. And in fact, I will say that homeschooling is, for most of us, the number one forum, not number two, not number three, but by far number one forum where you will learn God's grace. You will learn how to be humble. You will learn how to trust him. You will learn how to make it. You will learn how to push through a whole host of challenges that you will run into as parents. All right, I'm going to address a few of the objections now. So probably the number one objection that most of us hear is, what about socialization? Right? It's like the number one thing. And there's an answer that I really appreciate that I got from someone else, who he answers, do you really want your kids socialized by a mob of unruly third graders? And I like this because it depicts the reality that socialization in the other model isn't this panacea either. And I think about all of the foolishness that I encountered when I was in school. It wasn't quite Lord of the Flies, but it's maybe a couple levels away from that. And the notion of peers as being the primary ones that socialize your child, as opposed to a multi-generational pattern where you are there as well, is almost laughable. And this has actually been studied here. I don't want to get too much into boring scientific studies, social science studies, I should say. But here is a report from a paper that looks at a very well-respected metric here. And it says that, I'll just read here, on the global scale, it's called the PHSCS. So on all of the global scales and the 6 subscales, half of the homeschoolers scored at or above the 91st percentile. This condition may be due to higher achievement and mastery levels, independent study characteristics, or one-on-one tutoring situations in the homeschool environment. It can also be due perhaps to higher levels of parental interest in communication, peer independence, a sense of responsibility, and lowered anxiety levels. So when you actually measure with like real instruments that social scientists have developed, you find that it's in fact a complete canard. Also, use the church. We say this often, that we strive for really sharing a life together, and we have at minimum every single week here multiple hours of time for our children to be with one another on Sundays, on Wednesdays, on Fridays. That's kind of the bare minimum structures there. And if you are not utilizing that, then you are unfortunately eliminating the possibility for your children to get socialization in a context of people that you know and trust. And we are vigilant with ours. I mean, we have meetings here. We want to know, do any of our children have unfettered access to the internet? We try our best to ensure that our children are not just off being socialized by who knows who. This is a great opportunity. And of course, those are just our structured meetings. We have many times outside of that. And it's been really neat for me to watch the friendships develop among my children with some of the other children, particularly here on Oakland Street where we meet. What about academics? A lot of people say, what about academics? How in the world can we do this? Well, here's the official results here. So this is surveying about 12,000 homeschooling students and their families from all 50 states through 15 independent testing services. The results support the large existing body of research on homeschooling academic achievement and shows homeschoolers on average, and I want to come back to this in a sec, scoring 37 percentile points above public school students on standardized achievement tests. The study also found that the achievement gaps common to public schools are practically insignificant in the homeschool community. In other words, like public schools have big gaps between top and bottom. It tends to be narrower and they tend to be higher. Now, on average is really important. I will say that there are lots of times where I have seen homeschoolers be amazing, and I've seen lots of examples where homeschoolers will do worse than those in the public school. And so there is a bit of a bimodal character to all this. I'm going to touch on this a little bit here and say that you can't assume that just homeschooling alone will be sufficient to produce academic rigor. You have to be willing to really work hard and to push there. But if you do, then, and you operate within the right structures, on average, your children will score significantly better. This was one of the more rigorous studies. If you look at the SAT, which is the big test that people take for college, in general, they score higher, homeschoolers score higher in verbal, writing, and in math. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, I made it through, and, they'll say, oh, I got into such and such a school, and that's a good school. Well, even for those who made it through, we always have to ask, was it because of your schooling or was it in spite of your schooling? And we can't run the counterfactual and know what it was there. And maybe you would have done even better had you gone into another environment. And it's a little tricky just to use yourself as a personal example there. It's more rigorous to use studies like this that actually sample across both populations and make more measured and reasoned conclusions. Some people say, well, but I want them to be a witness. I want my child to be a witness, and I'm going to send them into the public schools, and I want them to evangelize. Okay, well, that's an argument. I've heard that many times. Well, would you send them to a Muslim madrasa? A madrasa is a Muslim school where they send young people and they learn the Quran and whatnot. It's a full-time, serious deal. Would you ever do that? I've never met somebody who would actually do that. What about a Buddhist monastery? There's plenty of monasteries that take children from the age of 5 and up. And wow, they get a rigorous education in meditation, in their religion, in a whole way of life. Would you do that? Never yet met anybody who makes this argument that if you take it to its logical conclusion, if you really want to be a witness, kind of the missionary kid, well, hey, send a missionary kid to the Muslim madrasa or the Buddhist monastery. Nobody says this. I'm not convinced that this is as genuine of an objection as people make it out to be. I think some of the other ones might be more genuine than this one here. Even the world recognizes that you can't go to war unless you're 18 years old. There's a certain level of physical strength, of emotional maturity, of capacities that you have to go into war, right? Like the world gets this. You can't join the US Army if you're 11 years old. Why is spiritual warfare any different? All right, you will undoubtedly encounter issues in your children. It is a given. There's a long list that we could make, and if we did an open mic here, I'm sure we could fill up many slides of this. My child doesn't listen to me, common one. My child can't pay attention. My children fight. Common objections that you hear often. Now, what most people then do is they say, okay, well, they can't do that, so I need to send them off to the schools because of these issues here. Well, the real question is that going to fix it? Or is that just papering over the problem and hoping that somehow somebody else fixes it, or it's out of sight, out of mind? And of course, the reality is that it doesn't fix the problem if you just push it off on someone else. The only way to fix these issues is to face them head on and to deal with them. I want to stress this here because I'm not saying that homeschooling is easy and that these issues are not gut-wrenching, difficult issues to face, right? And as I mentioned before, there will be times where you want to quit. But don't believe that sending your child away is going to fix the problem. It's not. In fact, it will probably make it worse because now it's going to go even more for a longer period without being addressed. And there's sort of crutches that are being applied there without actually dealing with the underlying issue. So we need to do this. All right, another one, I'm not qualified to teach. Another very common objection that you hear. The real question first is, can you learn? And I don't mean this at all facetiously. I mean this very genuinely, because especially for our children, one of the things that we want to model for them is this spirit of, hey, you can do this. Education is something that is within your grasp. And really what school is just a structure that facilitates you from learning. I mean, you're the one that chooses to learn or not learn. And what we ought to be modeling primarily as parents is this on the academic side, I should say, is the spirit of being a learner. And when the child comes to you and says, what's the quadratic equation? And you think, oh, it's been a long time since I've thought about the quadratic equation. You know what? I'm going to look it up with you, and we're going to sit down together for half an hour, and we're going to learn this together. And this act of modeling the spirit of learning, the spirit of wrestling together, is incredibly valuable. And if you can impart this to your child, and if you can sit with them side by side and wrestle through this, push through this. For a lot of people, their ceiling is junior high math. Once they hit algebra, they feel like they're over their heads. For other people, it's high school physics or biology or chemistry. Who knows what it is, right? But I'm guessing here the vast majority of people went through high school. Even if you didn't, I'm going to tell a fascinating story here. And there was in Uganda, there was a couple that lived in one of our housing units there, and the mother couldn't read. She was illiterate. And so you think, if ever there's a reason not to homeschool, there it is, right? You can't even read. And so I was very proud of the community there. They rallied together and taught her how to read. And so she began to read and actually learned to really enjoy reading. And now you can imagine the benefits that the family has, where now you have a previous situation where the wife couldn't even read. Now she can read, and the children get inspired, and it lifts up the whole family when you have that. And so even in that situation, they were able to homeschool in the context of illiteracy, because the parents were committed to learn. But really, most of what you do outside of these opportunities where you are sitting side by side with your child here is you're encouraging and coaching them on learning that they can teach themselves and they can master it on their own. Whether it's trigonometry or algebra or chemistry or physics or biology, whatever the subject is, to be able to instill in your child the sense of, I can do it, I can learn this subject, is so valuable. I mean, this is one of the greatest gifts you can give your children, where they feel like they can tackle any subject and grasp it on their own. This idea is called the growth mindset. There's a woman, a professor at Stanford, her name is Carol Dweck, who coined this term, the growth mindset. And it's the opposite is the fixed mindset. So the growth mindset is the person who says, I can do this. I have abilities that I haven't yet plumbed, and I can go further and further and higher and deeper. As opposed to somebody who's got the fixed mindset, and they just feel like they're stuck, and they think they're dumb, they think they can't do it, they think this and that. Well, first, the parents have to address their own growth versus fixed mindset. And I will say that outside of discipleship, if you can instill one thing in your child, if you can instill the growth mindset, you will have given them an incredibly valuable gift that will pay dividends for a lifetime. And of course, today with online resources, I mean, we are blessed with virtually every tool out there for almost any subject, a combination of lectures with websites that will grade the papers on their own. I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of resources out there on almost any subject that can compensate for a particular deficiency that you might have. You just have to have the growth mindset, and you want to be trying to instill that in your child. Okay, a couple of other tips here on doing homeschooling well. I'm really big on this, setting up lots of events and celebrations. So have church-wide events for your children's learning. I'm going to show you some pictures in a little bit of an event that we had I remember several years ago, Matthew Milioni organized an egg drop contest where everybody had to, all the children designed different uh, structures that would protect the egg from breaking when it was dropped from the second floor. And it was a really fun, great event. And we ought to be doing a lot of these and encouraging these and making them multi-generational, community-based events where we're fostering learning there. Making them really fun activities, marking out milestones. We did a recent event in our house to celebrate the end of a school year with just a banana split party, and enjoyed that, right? Sat around and could do that together. And I think it's very important to communicate the sense of these are special days. We're starting, we're stopping, we're hitting these, right? These are milestones that all of us appreciate. Experience history together. The field trip is one of the great blessings of homeschooling, where you can go on family field trips together. I'll show you some pictures there for us. This is a picture here from one of our church-wide events where the children all decided to make a day where they would pick a time period and then dress in the costume of that era, prepare food from that era, and they prepare these boards that would communicate information there. And so you can see my son and my daughter here standing in front of a board that showed what life was like for the early pilgrims here. And you can see my wife is, my daughter's dressed up in the costume there. There's one of my other boys here with the board that he set up, alphabets, ancient and symbolic. Really neat display that he made there. And he made a clay tablet there with some cuneiform down at the bottom, and everyone kind of walked around and saw that. Here's some people standing. Here's Dean Taylor and Jeremy standing in front of his exhibit, listening to him explain the different things there. Milestones, I think, are so valuable, and they add the structure that I think a lot of us appreciate. You know, one of the things that people struggle with homeschooling is I don't think they do enough structure. And I wish now in hindsight we'd done even more, going back to when we started. For us, the centerpiece of our day is our family devotion times. And I know I've said this many times, but I have citywide on this, on how I think that is one of the most, if not the most important times of your whole day, where you come together and we sing, we pray, we memorize the Bible, we read our journals. And then we celebrate this with milestones for every 200 days that we do it consecutively. We do a trip to someplace special here. So our first, when we hit 200 days, we went to Niagara Falls and had an absolute blast going to Niagara Falls. When we hit 400 days, we went to a place called Lamplighters. This is a publishing house in New York that they make old books that my children really enjoy, and we bought some books there and some posters that we still have hanging up in our place. At 600 days, we went to Washington, D.C. and went to a lot of museums, and this is us standing in front of the White House here. And George Washington's house, which is not far from there, and this is Martin Luther King. So, you know, going and enjoying the history. And I will say, I've noticed this, we've put a lot of emphasis on history that I think my children's knowledge of history vastly exceeds mine from when I was in high school or college. Whenever I go with them to museums and places like that, I am blown away by how much more history they know than I ever did in my training. So as I said, structuring education is really important. We do report cards in our house, and I think that's, for us, an important way to keep structure and a sense of timing and accomplishment and measurement on how you're doing there against the standard. I'll say that when I've noticed people have not done well with homeschooling, it's been too unstructured, and there's not a clear standard that they're trying to hit. There's not really a marker on, have I hit this or have I not? You know, just reading a lot of books is not homeschooling. It's great to read, but there is such a thing as defining how well you're doing relative to a test. And I am really big on reading comprehension, on doing your math well, writing out your work well so people can see that. These are things that you got to sit, and it starts at a young age at instilling this and making sure that there's real excellence being taught there. Gamifying what you can. We use this with different activities like chess, and you know what gamifying is. It's where you turn something that's not normally structured as a game into a game. We have a very well-defined schedule. I know not everyone does, but we have a well-defined schedule every day that we employ with chores. And we feel it's very important for the children to wash dishes, to vacuum, to clean up, to do all those things. And that's a big part of the day. And I think taking tests with time pressure, and like I said, realizing there's a truth standard where our oldest one will be soon taking the PSAT, just to, again, get in the sense, the rhythm of like, okay, this is how you do a test under time pressure. These are good things for ours to learn. And like I said, I think this is one of the mistakes that people make in homeschooling is they don't add enough structure, and it's a little too loose where you don't have a clear sense of progress against the standard. The father and the mother should both be involved. I have certain subjects that I do. My wife does certain subjects, and you can go and do things creative as well. They don't have to be standard subjects. If your main goal is discipleship and your number 2 goal is the growth mindset, that gives you a lot of latitude on what you can teach. Somebody might be good with woodworking. Great, teach woodworking. I'm not. I happen to enjoy computer programming, and so I have my children doing pretty serious computer programming. And just today, one of my boys walked into the room where I was working and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm trying to write this algorithm on it was involving a structured list in Python. How do you do it?" And I took 5 minutes out and I wrote the algorithm there for him, and we walked through that. This is not something that should be simply on the shoulders of the mother. And in fact, I think the father should have a very active role of oversight, of doing certain subjects, and of really communicating his own gifts and interests into the schooling process. Okay, I think I have just 2 more slides. So just concepts to teach. Discipleship of the mind is part of spiritual discipleship. This is what I was touching on before, that we need to remember that excellence in algebra is related to your excellence in spiritual discipleship. You may not think it is, but it is. We want to strive to understand all of our subjects well, the created order, math, all these disciplines really well. And people who can do well in the full package there, that's a great marker for how well you're going to do with spiritual discipleship as well. Teaching organization and scheduling. I mentioned the growth mindset. And then some of you know Dorothy Sayers. She adapted the classical paradigm of education. We're not really necessarily devotees of the classical structure, but she had a good insight here, which is that there's one way you can look at a child's education is 3 phases: the grammar phase, the logic phase, and the rhetoric phase. And the grammar phase is basically where children can learn facts, and they're really good at just remembering lots and lots of things. They're good at languages and osmosing there. That's like elementary school age, say up to grade 5. That's when you should be doing subjects like history and languages, where they are good at just remembering these facts, which is interesting because we normally do that in high school, in regular public school. And then logic is how you organize things, how you comprehend text, how you can stitch together arguments. That would be like the junior high stage. A lot of people don't learn how to do that, and it hurts them terribly. And then finally, rhetoric. Our children should be able to give a speech, write an essay, to be persuasive there. We have a goal of persuading the world of the reality of Jesus and his claims. And to learn how to do that, particularly that high school stage, is very important. And so you can structure there your education along those lines, and there's whole books that can guide you there in that way. And for those interested, my wife and Faith Ann and a bunch of others contributed to make a longer document on some of the nuts and bolts on how to do this, and some resources there. All right, my last slide is lots of helps and bridges to homeschooling. A lot of people are scared by it. So, hey, they say, I want to try a co-op. There's some very popular co-ops there. I think that's a fine way to bridge in. I want to do a tutor for a subject. Great, go for that. We are blessed here at Follows the Way to have lots of people who have gone through this and are going through it. You have a lot of resources here, and just be around. We spend a lot of time talking about these things and sitting around the fire discussing what's going on with with our lives. And you, and anybody who is interested in homeschooling should really have a rich face-to-face life with fellow brothers and sisters who are walking through this and asking questions. What about this? What about that? It takes a lot of perseverance, a lot of effort, a lot of wisdom. And so with that, I'm going to close with, this is our question for discussion here as we go into the breakout rooms. It's inspired from the John Chrysostom quote that I read earlier, who said, like the creators of statues, give all of your leisure time to fashioning these statues, make them athletes for Christ. So what does this look like? And even if you never were homeschooled, you're single, whatever your situation is, I would love to hear ideas on designing an amazing training program for children. This is something that is not a private endeavor, but it's something that we could certainly benefit from community input here. So I think would be a great question for us to talk about, or anything related to anything that I shared. So with that, I'm gonna close and hand it back